I think we all know that connection is important. And when we were growing up, and even now, we all strive to have the most connections possible. And a way that we sometimes view getting those connections is by being very fake around everyone, to put it in simple terms. And what I mean by that is we try to make everyone happy even when it sacrifices ourselves. It's something that when repeated day by day, it's just a slow erosion of yourself bit by bit, where we begin to lose sense of what we actually want or need and begin basing things off of what's going to make everyone comfortable. And the crazy thing about that philosophy is that we're going to fail at it anyways. And that's the punchline of the whole thing, of this whole video, actually. You pour yourself out completely trying to keep everyone happy, and you still don't manage to do it. Those who seek to please everybody please nobody. George Washington said it. John Lennon said it. And 100 years from now, someone's going to say it again, and a bunch of people are still willing to nod their heads and then go home and do the exact opposite. And I think it's a quote that we've had to live with, obviously for so long, but it's one of those quotes that we always hear, but I don't think we ever apply truly. So let's talk about why. And yeah, because I think the problem isn't that people don't know the saying. Everyone knows the saying, you can't please everyone. Yeah. It's very profound. But the problem is that people don't understand what they're actually trading away when they try. Because I think the biggest motivator to get people to change their ways is to make them realize what it's costing them. And in this case, it's not just your time. It's not just inconvenience. What you're actually trading when you live in this mode of constant people pleasing is your identity, your actual sense of who you are. And you don't notice it happening because every individual instance seems so small and so reasonable. You say yes to something you wanted to say no to. It's like, okay, fine, no big deal. I'm being flexible. I'm being a good person. And you swallow an opinion you had because the room wasn't going to like it. Okay, fine, pick your battles. It's not worth the drama. And you change your plans because someone needed something from you. It's like, okay, fine, I'm being helpful. And each one of these things on its own is harmless, is genuinely fine. That's just being a functional human being who lives with other human beings. But when that's your default, when that's the mode you operate in all the time, when you have no other gear, then you've got a problem. Because at some point you look up and you have spent so long curating yourself for other people's comfort that you genuinely cannot tell anymore what you actually want. What you actually think, who you actually are when nobody's watching, these things you can't even consider because your norm is not situated in this form of thinking for yourself. And I think that's the real cost. That's what nobody talks about. I want to be honest about something here because this is one of those topics where it's easy to stand here and talk like I've got it all figured out and I'm immune to this. And I'm not. I've had to actively work on this and I still do, honestly. There's this thing that happens, at least for me, where I'll genuinely know in my gut that I don't want to do something or that I disagree with something or that I need to say no. And then this whole other process kicks in where I just start running through how the other person's going to react. If they're going to be upset, if they're going to think differently of me, if there's going to be this awkward thing hanging over everything now. And then the easier move always feels like just saying yes, just to agree, just to smooth it over and count it off as not a big deal. And that's the trap, because in the moment, it genuinely doesn't feel like a big deal. But then you walk away from that moment and there's this low-level crappy feeling that just sits with you. And you can't always name it, but it's there. And it's this residue of not having shown up honestly. And over time, that builds up into resentment. Whether that be resentment towards the people you kept saying yes to, even though it wasn't their fault, they didn't make you do it. Or resentment towards yourself, which is honestly the worst one. And I thought about this the last couple of days. And I think when you're someone who struggles to disappoint people, it usually isn't really about the other person. You tell yourself it's because you care about them or because you don't want to hurt their feelings or whatever. And maybe there's some of that, but mostly I think it's about you. And it's about your own discomfort with conflict, your own fear of being disliked, your own anxiety about what someone's going to think of you if you say the wrong thing or make the wrong move. And the really uncomfortable truth about that is that people pleasing, when you strip it all the way back, is actually a pretty self-centered thing. Because you're not saying yes because it's genuinely the right thing to do in that moment. You're saying yes to protect yourself from the discomfort of being someone else's source of disappointment. So really the yes is for you and not for them. And I'm not saying that to make anyone feel bad about it, because it's human. It's deeply, completely human. We're wired to want to be accepted. And that's not a flaw, that's biology. But you have to be honest with yourself about what's actually happening. Because if you're not honest about it, you really can't do anything about it. And another layer that I think is important to recognize is that when you make yourself infinitely available and infinitely agreeable to everyone around you, you train people to expect that from you. And then when you eventually, inevitably can't deliver, they're not just dealing with disappointment. They're dealing with something that feels like betrayal. Because you spent so long signaling that your needs don't really exist that they sort of stopped accounting for them. So you created that problem, not maliciously, but it was a byproduct. And that means that the longer you wait to start being honest about what you need and what you're not willing to do, the harder it gets. Because now you're not just saying no for the first time. You're shifting who you've been presenting yourself as. And that shift really changes how people view you in ways that you can't even expect. So really, that is why starting early matters. This is why it's so much easier to just be honest from the beginning, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you worry someone won't like it. Because the alternative isn't keeping the peace. It's just delaying the reckoning and making it bigger. And then with this conversation, I think it's also important to at least note that we have to consider the people who are not going to like you no matter what you do. Because this is the part I think people forget when they're in this cycle of trying to keep everyone happy. There are people who are going to have a problem with you regardless of how much you bend yourself in their direction. They're never going to be satisfied, because what's actually driving their reaction has almost nothing to do with you specifically. It's their own stuff, their own expectations, their own insecurities, their own ideas about how the world should work. And when you sacrifice yourself trying to get those people on your side, you haven't won anything. And you've just made yourself smaller for someone who is never going to give you what you were hoping to get from them. And meanwhile, the people who would actually appreciate the real you, the one with actual opinions and actual limits and an actual no in its vocabulary, those people never get to meet you because you've got the mask on full time. That's really the real loss. So what do you do with all this? Because I don't just want to sit here for 8 minutes, 10 minutes, however long this video is going to be, going people pleasing bad, be authentic, very inspirational, see you guys next time. I think the first thing is just truly getting honest with yourself about where you're doing that. Like, be honest, because most people who do this have convinced themselves that they're just nice, or they're just flexible, or they're just not a confrontational person. And maybe that's true. But if you feel that low-level resentment, if you feel that residue after conversations where you didn't say the real thing, if you feel like people don't actually know you, then something's off, and it's worth looking at directly. The second thing is just starting small. You don't have to go flip your whole personality overnight. It's one conversation. It's saying the opinion you would have swallowed. It's saying, I'm not going to be able to do that this time, instead of contorting your whole schedule to say yes. It's one small honest moment where you trust that the relationship can handle it. And if it can't, if the relationship actually falls apart because you said one honest no, then you've learned something really important about that relationship. Something that you needed to know. The next part is going to sound cliche, but I did want to point out that Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the happiness of those who seek the approval of others depends on others. And it sounds simple, obviously, like this whole idea of if you make everyone happy, you're going to lose yourself. It all sounds very obvious, but think about what that actually means for how you're living. Because if your sense of whether things are okay is entirely dependent on whether the people around you are comfortable and happy with you in any given moment, then you have handled the controls of your own life to everyone except yourself. And everyone's going to want to go somewhere different. And you're going to be yanked in 100 directions and never move anywhere at all. That only way out is to decide that your opinion of yourself matters, that your honest experience of your own life matters, that disappointing someone is survivable for them and for you. And you're not going to get there by just deciding it. You build it, one uncomfortable, honest moment at a time. I'll lead this with, you know who's not happy? The person who spent their whole life making sure everyone else was. That's the person who never really cared about themselves. Think about that. All right. See you guys later.